quiet mistake didn't arrive with a scandal. It didn't show up as a single decision I could point to and say, "That ruined me." It was smaller than that. It was the habit of letting my life be decided by what was urgent instead of what was important. When I was younger, I treated urgency like proof. If something demanded my attention right now, I assumed it mattered. If it could wait, I assumed it wasn't serious. I answered every message quickly. I took every extra shift. I stayed late because it looked responsible. I said yes because I didn't want to be difficult. And the strange part is that the world rewards that. People call you reliable. They call you driven. They call you the one we can count on. You start believing you're building a good life. But what you're really building is a schedule that belongs to everyone else. I remember one particular evening, nothing dramatic, just a Tuesday. I had promised myself I would work on a personal project, something I cared about in a quiet way. It wasn't going to impress anyone. It was just mine. I've been carrying it around for months, telling myself I'd start when I had time. That night, I finally had the time. Then my phone rang. A coworker needed help. 10 minutes, he said, a quick fix. I looked at the notebook on my table, the blank page waiting, and I told myself I could write later. I took the call. 10 minutes became an hour. The hour became another task, then another. By the time I sat down again, the feeling was gone, not inspiration, something more basic, the willingness to begin. I didn't think much of it. I told myself I'd do it tomorrow. Tomorrow became next week. Next week became next month. And if you want the truth, that pattern repeated for years. That is the trap. Postponing the things that give your life its shape because they don't scream for attention the way everything else does. The cost isn't obvious at first. You still look functional. You still pay the bills. You still show up. You're still doing fine. But slowly you notice you don't recognize your own days. You live inside obligations. You breathe in small pockets. You tell yourself you'll make it up later. Later is not a place you arrive. It's a story you tell while time keeps moving. I wish someone had told me that the most dangerous losses happen quietly in ordinary weeks when nothing is wrong enough to change. I learned later that the calendar doesn't punish you for delay. It simply keeps turning, indifferent to your good intentions. That's when your life gets decided. For a long time, I blamed my circumstances. I told myself I didn't have time because I had responsibilities, because I was tired, because the season was demanding. I said it the way people say, I've just been busy. And I believed it that the way people believe weather is unavoidable. But the truth is I did have time. I just spent it on the wrong things. Not wrong in the moral sense. Wrong in the this will not matter later sense. I spent it smoothing problems that were not mine to solve. I spent it on constant availability, being reachable, being responsive, being the person who never took too long to answer. I spent it on work that looked important because it produced noise, meetings, emails, updates, little fires. And when I was finally alone, I spent what was left on numbness, scrolling, television that I barely watched, snacks eaten standing up, sleep that never quite repaired me. None of that is unusual. That's how most adults survive. You put your head down, you get through it, and you tell yourself You'll take your life seriously when things calm down. Life doesn't calm down, it rearranges itself. One afternoon, I ran into a man I hadn't seen in years. We used to talk about the same dream, something creative, something we wanted to build. Back then, we sounded like we had all the runway in the world. I asked him what happened to it. He smiled the way people smile when they don't want to be judged. You know, he said, work got busy, kids, just life. He said it without bitterness, as if it were an explanation and not an epitaph. Driving home, I realized I had said the same sentence for a decade. That's another part of the slow drift, using life as a blanket explanation for choices you're afraid to name. Because when you name it, you have to admit you chose convenience over courage. You chose the familiar over the meaningful. You chose to avoid disappointment by never really trying. At some point, you stop asking what you want, and you start asking what will keep everything stable. Stability is not bad, but stability can become a cage if you never build a door. I didn't need more motivation. I needed clarity about what I was trading away each time I postponed the work that mattered. Every year I delayed, I wasn't merely waiting. I was practicing a kind of surrender, and practice becomes identity. That's how a life gets smaller without anyone noticing. The edges pull inward slowly, like a tide receding, until one day you look around and realize how much ground you gave up. The most painful part wasn't the lost projects. It was the way the habit of postponement spread into everything else. I started postponing honest conversations, not because I was dishonest, but because I wanted things to stay smooth. I didn't want conflict. I didn't want to be the person who made it a thing. So I let small resentments sit quietly, and they grew roots. I postponed calling people I loved. I'd see their name, think I should reach out, and then wait for a better moment. A moment when I had more energy, more time, a clearer head. The better moment rarely came. And because I was always a little behind, I was always in a mild panic. Not enough to crash, just enough to keep me reactive. The urgent always won. I remember missing a call from my father one day. It was a simple missed call, nothing ominous. I saw it, thought I'd call back after dinner. Then a message came in from work, and I got pulled into it. By the time I finished, it was late. I told myself I'd call tomorrow. The next day turned into a rush. Meetings, errands, life. The day after that, I still hadn't called. I finally did, 3 days later, and he answered like nothing had happened. But the moment stayed with me because I realized how easily I could lose something important without meaning to. That is the cruelty of postponement. It makes your love feel optional. It turns your best intentions into someday, and someday is not guaranteed. Later in life, you learn that time doesn't only pass. It changes the people you love while you're busy doing other things. A friend becomes a stranger. A parent grows older in small increments you don't witness. A relationship drifts because no one is steering. This habit is not merely wasting time. It is living as if what matters will remain available indefinitely. If you're in your 30s or 40s, you still have more control than you think. But control is not a feeling, it's a practice. You have to decide that some things get time even when you're tired. You have to treat a call, a walk, a difficult conversation as real work. work that keeps your life from becoming a collection of obligations. I used to think a meaningful life would announce itself, that I would feel a clear purpose, then naturally reorder my days. It doesn't happen that way. Most of us don't get a trumpet. We get a quiet choice, repeated. Do I answer another email, or do I call my brother? Do I keep the peace, or do I tell the truth? Do I postpone the doctor again, or do I schedule the appointment? Those choices are not dramatic, but they are cumulative. They are how you either build a life you recognize or slowly drift into one you don't. There's a reason postponement feels so safe. When you delay something important, you protect yourself from immediate discomfort. You avoid the awkward conversation. You avoid the possibility of failing at the thing you care about. You avoid the risk of being seen trying. You avoid the moment where you have to admit what you actually want and then live with the fact that you might not get it. Delay offers a kind of temporary innocence. As long as you haven't started, you haven't failed. As long as you haven't spoken, you haven't been rejected. As long as you haven't changed, you can pretend you're still the type of person who will. I lived in that illusion for too long. I told myself I was a writer because I had ideas. I told myself I was a good friend because I meant well. I told myself I cared about my health because I intended to get serious soon. Intention is cheap. It lets you keep a flattering identity without paying the price of action. The bill comes later with interest. In my 40s, I met an old colleague for coffee. We hadn't seen each other in years. He looked tired in a way that wasn't just physical. He talked about work the way people talk about a long illness, something he managed, something he endured. At one point he said, almost casually, I keep thinking I'll do what I really want when the kids are grown. He said it kindly, without drama, as if that were simply the plan. But as he spoke, I watched him rub his hands together, a small nervous motion. I realized he wasn't confident he would ever do it. He was bargaining with time. We all bargain. We tell ourselves we'll live later, after the next raise, after the next move, after the next calm season. But later is not a promise. It's a bet. And the odds are not as generous as young people assume. I wish someone had sat me down and said, you do not get unlimited reinventions. You get a certain amount of energy, a certain amount of freedom, a certain amount of unspoken possibility. And if you spend those years on postponement, you don't simply lose time. You lose momentum, you lose courage, you lose the identity that comes from keeping promises to yourself. The people who seem disciplined are often just people who learn something early, that the discomfort of starting is cheaper than the regret of never beginning. I had to learn it the hard way. That pattern was not one big decision. It was the refusal to pay small discomforts, day after day, until the cost became unbearable. And once you see that pattern, you can finally change it. Not with grand reinvention, with small, honest steps that make you trustworthy to yourself again. The day I began to change wasn't a breakthrough day. It was an ordinary day, which is usually how change really happens. I had a list of things that needed attention, work, errands, messages. And in the middle of it, I felt a sudden tiredness that wasn't about sleep. It was the tiredness of living a life that never quite touched the center of what mattered to me. So I did something small. I blocked 20 minutes, not 2 hours, not a weekend retreat. 20 minutes. I sat at the table and opened the notebook I'd avoided. I told myself I wasn't required to produce anything brilliant. I just had to begin. I wrote one paragraph, then another. When the timer went off, I felt an unexpected relief. Not because I'd made progress that would impress anyone, but because I had finally done what I said I would do. That is what the old habit steals from you, the feeling of self-trust. When you break small promises to yourself repeatedly, you begin to live with a low-grade doubt about your own word. You stop believing you can change because your history with yourself says you won't. The cure is not self-criticism. The cure is proof. Small proof. Repeated. After that day, I started choosing one thing each week that mattered more than it screamed. One call I had been postponing, one appointment I had avoided, 1 hour for work that was meaningful but not urgent. Some weeks I failed. I postponed again. But even then I noticed the difference. I no longer called it life. I called it what it was. Avoidance, fatigue, fear, distraction. Naming it didn't make me perfect, but it made me honest. And honesty is how you get your life back. If you're trying to schedule your days, here's the simplest rule I learned. Don't let your calendar be filled only by other people's needs. Leave a small protected space for what matters to you. Protect it the way you'd protect an appointment for someone you love. Because the truth is, you are someone you love, or you should be. I also learned to stop waiting for the feeling of readiness. Readiness is rare. The willingness to begin is what you can practice. Some of the best things in my life started clumsily. A first draft, a hard conversation, a walk on a day I didn't feel like moving, a budget written down instead of imagined. None of it was dramatic. It was quiet. And over time, quiet changes add up. They restore the sense that you are not merely reacting to your life. You are steering. That is the opposite of the old habit. That is how you stop losing years without noticing and start building days you recognize. There is a particular kind of grief that comes with realizing you waited too long. It isn't always about death, though death sharpens it. It's the grief of seeing yourself clearly and realizing how many chances you let pass because you assumed there would be more. Sometimes it's a relationship you didn't tend. Sometimes it's a skill you never developed. Sometimes it's a dream you kept packed away like a suitcase, telling yourself you'd open it when the house was quieter. I experienced it most strongly after a friend died unexpectedly. Not an old friend, not someone we had been preparing to lose. He was in the middle of life. One day he was here, and the next day he wasn't. At the memorial, people kept saying the same sentences. I can't believe it. We just talked. I meant to call. I had said those sentences before about other people, and standing there I realized that I meant to is one of the saddest phrases we use. Because meaning to is not the same as doing. After that, I started paying attention to the ways postponement hides behind politeness. I don't want to bother them. They're busy. It's not a good time. I'll do it when I can do it right. Often, those are just elegant disguises for fear. Fear of being awkward. Fear of being rejected. Fear of discovering the other person has moved on. Fear of facing your own neglect. So here's something I wish I'd practiced earlier. Reach out imperfectly. Send the simple message. Make the short call. Say, I've been thinking about you. You don't have to deliver a speech. You just have to show up. And if you need to apologize, apologize without decoration. Not a long explanation that turns into a defense. Just a clean sentence. I'm sorry, I should have handled that differently. The longer you wait, the heavier it feels. The heavier it feels, the more you avoid it. That's how time hardens things. I also learned to handle practical matters sooner. Know where the important papers are. Know the basic wishes of the people you love. Talk about uncomfortable realities while everyone can still speak calmly. These are not morbid tasks. They are acts of care. They prevent confusion from turning into conflict when people are already hurting. Grief taught me something else. It rearranges your priorities without asking permission. Suddenly, the trivial dramas lose their shine. You stop negotiating with people who drain you. You stop pretending you'll do important things someday. You don't have to wait for grief to teach you that. You can learn it now, while the lesson is still gentle. The assumption is thinking you have unlimited tomorrows. The remedy is living like today counts because it does, not with panic, with presence, with the simple dignity of doing what you said you would do while you still can. Courage is not a personality trait, it's a decision you practice. I used to think brave people were simply born that way. They moved confidently, they took risks, they spoke up, they changed their lives as if it were easy. What I didn't see was the private part, the trembling before the phone call, the nausea before the conversation, the doubt after the choice. Most courage looks boring from the outside. It looks like sending the email you've been avoiding. It looks like asking for help without making it a joke. It looks like saying no without explaining yourself into exhaustion. And it looks like starting small, even when your pride wants a grand beginning. One of the most important moments for me was a conversation I had put off for years. It wasn't dramatic, but it mattered. I needed to tell someone close to me that something was not working. I had been swallowing it to keep the peace. I rehearsed it in my head for months. Every time I imagined it, I pictured the worst. Anger, blame, distance, the relationship ending. When I finally spoke, the other person did not explode. They were quiet. They looked hurt. And then they said something simple. I wish you'd told me sooner. That sentence hit me like a weight, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. My silence hadn't protected the relationship. It had protected my comfort. It had allowed the problem to grow in the dark. That is the old pattern in another form, confusing avoidance with kindness. Kindness is honest. Kindness is timely. Kindness is willing to be uncomfortable to protect what matters. At any age, but especially in midlife, you begin to see the cost of staying small, the jobs you don't leave, the habits you don't change, the conversations you don't have. You can survive most of those choices, but you don't survive them intact. They slowly reshape you. So if you want a practical way to practice courage, do the next honest thing, not the perfect thing, not the heroic thing, the next honest thing. Schedule the appointment, take the walk, send the message, start the class, Write the paragraph, clean the drawer, tell the truth, and if you fail, don't turn it into a prophecy. Failure is information, not identity. Adjust and try again. Most doors open because someone knocked more than once without drama. The old pattern says, wait until you feel ready. Courage says, begin while you're unsure. Over time, those small beginnings turn into a different life, not because you became a different person overnight, but because you stopped letting fear decide your days. That is how you stop losing your life quietly. You reclaim it quietly too, one honest action at a time. When people talk about wasting a life, they imagine big disasters, and they imagine addiction, crime, tragedy, the kind of story with a clear villain. But many lives are lost in a gentler way. They are lost to drift. Drift looks like always being busy and never being satisfied. It looks like postponing joy because you're being responsible. It looks like not taking care of your body because you're too tired. It looks like staying in a relationship that makes you smaller because leaving feels like too much trouble. Drift does not feel dramatic. That's why it's dangerous. The older I get, the more I understand that meaning is not something you discover like a hidden treasure. It's something you make. You make it by choosing what you will pay attention to. Attention is the real currency of a life. If you spend your attention on what is loud, you will live a loud life that still feels empty. If you spend it on what is quiet but important, relationships, health, craft, faith, service, whatever is true for you, you build a life that feels solid. I wish someone had told me earlier that joy is often quiet. It's not a constant high. It's a clean kitchen after dinner. It's a walk without your phone. It's a conversation where you tell the truth and feel the relief of being known. It's the satisfaction of finishing something you started. You don't need to impress the world to live with dignity. You need a life you can sit with at night. That means you stop letting urgency run your schedule. You decide on purpose that some things get time. You protect them. You keep your promises to yourself. You do the small maintenance that keeps your relationships alive. You apologize quickly. You show up. And you also forgive yourself for the years you didn't know better. Guilt can become another form of postponement. It can keep you stuck in the story of what you should have done instead of the work of what you can do now. The past is not changeable, but it is useful. It can teach you what patterns to stop repeating. If I could go back and speak to my younger self, I wouldn't scold him. I would tell him the truth with calmness. I would say, the quiet mistake is living as if you have unlimited time. And I would add, you still have time, but not for everything. So choose what you want your days to be made of. Choose what you want people to say about how it felt to be around you. Choose what you want to build, even if it's small. Choose the habit of beginning. A life is not saved by one big moment. It is saved by small decisions, repeated until they become your character. That is how you stop losing years. You start living them.